the woman the world called a saint, the woman who won a Nobel Peace Prize, the woman who spent decades caring for the dying poor in Calcutta. But what if everything you thought you knew about Mother Teresa was a carefully constructed lie? What if behind the white sari and gentle smile lurked something far more sinister than the world ever imagined? Tonight, we descend into the shadows of one of history's most carefully guarded secrets. We'll uncover the disturbing truth that the Catholic Church has spent billions trying to hide. We'll expose the dark practices that took place within the walls of her so-called houses of mercy. And we'll reveal how a woman who claimed to serve the poorest of the poor became one of the wealthiest and most powerful figures in modern religious history. You think you know Mother Teresa. You know nothing. For decades, the image was immaculate. Agnes Gongsha-Bojakshiu, known to the world as Mother Teresa, was the living embodiment of selfless service. The small woman in white who dedicated her life to the dying poor of Calcutta. The gentle soul who held the hands of lepers and spoke of love in the darkest corners of human suffering. But what happens when you pull back the veil? What happens when you look beyond the carefully crafted public image and examine the actual evidence? Christopher Hitchens, the controversial journalist and author, was one of the first to dare ask these questions. In his damning expose, The Missionary Position, he didn't just question Mother Teresa's methods. He revealed a pattern of behavior so disturbing that it shook the very foundations of her saintly image. The evidence is overwhelming, and it's terrifying. Let's start with the missionaries of charity clinics. These weren't hospitals in any meaningful sense of the word. They were, according to numerous medical professionals who witnessed them firsthand, nightmarish warehouses where human suffering was prolonged rather than alleviated. Dr. Robin Fox, editor of the British medical journal The Lancet, visited one of these facilities and was horrified by what he found. No medical charts, no proper record keeping, no systematic diagnosis, no pain management. Patients with treatable conditions left to suffer and die, while donations poured in by the millions. But here's the truly disturbing part. This wasn't due to lack of resources. Mother Teresa's organization was receiving tens of millions of dollars annually. So where was that money going? The suffering was by design. Mother Teresa openly stated that suffering was a gift from God. She believed that the poor must suffer as Christ suffered, that their pain brought them closer to God. She denied basic pain medication to dying patients, not out of necessity, but out of ideology. Imagine lying on a hard cot, dying slowly from a painful condition. Imagine begging for relief, knowing that medicine exists just outside these walls. Now imagine being told that your agony is beautiful, that it's God's will, that it makes you holy. That was Mother Teresa's house of mercy. Follow the money, they say. And following Mother Teresa's money leads to some very dark places indeed. Conservative estimates suggest that over 3 decades, her organization collected over $100 million worldwide. Wealthy donors, governments, and countless ordinary people contributed to what they believed was a holy cause. But the poor never saw most of this money. Instead, Mother Teresa opened nearly 700 missions worldwide, not in the service of medical care, but in the service of evangelical conversion. The goal wasn't to heal the poor, it was to save their souls before they died. And if saving their souls required a little strategic withholding of medical care, well, that was just God's plan. The Vatican bank connection is particularly troubling. Large sums from her organization made their way into Vatican accounts. Some of this money came from very questionable sources, including criminals and dictators who used charitable donations as a way to launder their reputations. Charles Keating, the notorious chairman of the Lincoln Savings and Loan Association, donated $1.25 million to Mother Teresa. This was money stolen from elderly pensioners. When the Attorney General's office asked her to return the funds, she never responded. The woman who claimed to speak for the poorest of the poor kept money stolen from the elderly poor. Here's where the story becomes truly sinister. Mother Teresa didn't just withhold medical care. She used the vulnerability of dying people as an opportunity for forced religious conversion. Dr. Fox observed volunteers being taught to secretly baptize dying patients by placing a wet finger on their forehead. This wasn't with consent. This wasn't with knowledge. This was a violation of the most fundamental human rights, performed on people too weak to resist. Hindu and Muslim patients, many of whom had specific religious requirements for death and afterlife, were having their most sacred beliefs violated in their final moments. Their families later discovered that their loved ones had been listed as Christian converts in the records, regardless of their actual faith. The philosophy was clear. All suffering leads to God, but only the Christian God counts. Everyone else was damned anyway, so why not claim their souls in secret? While claiming to serve the poor, Mother Teresa maintained disturbing relationships with some of history's worst dictators and criminals, always ready to accept their donations and legitimize their rule. She praised the Albanian dictator Enver Hoxha, one of the most brutal communist leaders of the 20th century. She defended the Duvalier regime in Haiti, a dynasty of corruption and violence that kept its people in poverty for decades. Why? Because these dictators were Catholic, or at least Catholic-friendly, and because they gave her organization substantial donations. The suffering of the people under these regimes was acceptable collateral damage in her divine mission. She even praised Jean-Bertrand Aristide in Haiti, not caring about his human rights record or the misery of his people as long as he supported her missions and conversion efforts. The pattern is clear. Mother Teresa wasn't interested in fighting poverty or suffering. She was interested in accumulating power and influence for the Catholic Church, even if it meant legitimizing the very forces that kept people poor and oppressed. After her death in 1997, the Catholic Church moved with unusual speed to beatify and canonize her. Usually, this process takes decades or even centuries. For Mother Teresa, it took less than 2 decades. But the miracles required for sainthood, they're questionable at best. The first miracle was the healing of Monica Bezra's ovarian tumor. But here's the problem. Multiple doctors testified that Bezra received conventional medical treatment For her condition, the healing had nothing to do with Mother Teresa. The second miracle was equally dubious. The healing of a patient with brain tumors. Again, medical records showed conventional treatment. The Church ignored medical evidence and testimony from the actual doctors involved. They needed their saint, and they were going to have her evidence be damned. Perhaps the most disturbing aspect of Mother Teresa's legacy is her philosophy of suffering. She genuinely believed that poverty and pain brought people closer to God. She saw herself not as someone fighting against suffering, but as someone who found beauty in it. She said, "Pain and suffering have come into your life. But remember, pain, sorrow, suffering are but the kiss of Jesus, a sign that you have come so close to Him that He can kiss you." This isn't charity. This isn't compassion. This is a twisted ideology that sees human misery as sacred, that finds divine purpose in preventable deaths. When Mother Teresa herself became ill, did she follow her own philosophy? Did she embrace her pain as a gift from God? Numbers she received the finest medical care available, flying to exclusive clinics in the West when she needed treatment. The suffering she found so beautiful and holy was only beautiful when it happened to other people. The Catholic Church has spent enormous resources maintaining Mother Teresa's image. When Hitchens published his expose, the Church immediately went on the offensive, not by addressing his evidence, but by attacking his character and motives. Independent journalists who tried to investigate were denied access. Medical records disappeared. Witnesses were pressured to remain silent. The Vatican archives related to her organization remained sealed. This isn't the behavior of an organization with nothing to hide. This is the behavior of an institution engaged in a massive cover-up to protect one of their most valuable assets. The questions remain. How much money really went to the poor? How many people died who could have been saved? How many were forced into religious conversion in their final moments? How many dictators and criminals were legitimized by her association? What kind of person could maintain such a facade for so long? What psychological factors allowed Mother Teresa to genuinely believe she was doing good while causing such harm? Religious narcissism is a recognized psychological phenomenon. It's the belief that one is divinely chosen, that normal moral rules don't apply, that any action can be justified in service of a higher purpose. Mother Teresa showed classic signs of this condition. She never questioned her methods or their results. She never showed genuine empathy for the suffering she could have prevented. She maintained absolute certainty in her righteousness, despite overwhelming evidence of harm. Her famous dark night of the soul, her admitted decades-long loss of faith, makes her actions even more disturbing. For 50 years, she continued her work without believing, driven not by divine love, but by something far more human and far more dark, the need for control, for power, for the adoration of the masses. Today, Mother Teresa remains an almost unquestioned icon of goodness and charity. Statues stand in her honor. Streets bear her name. The poor still believe she fought for them. But the truth is darker. Her legacy is one of preventable suffering, of exploitation of the vulnerable, of the use of charity as a weapon for religious imperialism. The woman who claimed to see Jesus in every poor person actually saw something very different. She saw potential converts. She saw political allies. She saw sources of money and power for her organization. The most chilling aspect of Mother Teresa's story isn't just what she did. It's how successfully the truth has been hidden. It's how few people know about Dr. Fox's damning report, about the money trail, about the forced conversions, about the relationships with dictators. It's how the world still sees her as a saint when the evidence reveals something far more sinister. As we dig deeper into the Mother Teresa myth, disturbing questions emerge from every angle. Questions that the Catholic Church has spent enormous resources ensuring remain unanswered. What happened to the millions of dollars that disappeared into Vatican accounts? How many treatable diseases were left untreated while money sat in offshore investments? How many dying people were denied basic painkillers so they could share in Christ's suffering? But perhaps the most haunting question is this: how many other Mother Teresas are operating right now? How many charitable organizations are using suffering as a tool for conversion, collecting money for the poor while keeping it for institutional power? The Mother Teresa story isn't just about one woman's dark actions. It's a blueprint for how religious institutions can exploit human suffering while maintaining a facade of saintliness. The most tragic aspect of this story is the voices that were silenced, the poor who died in agony when they could have been saved, the families who watched their loved ones suffer while millions sat in Vatican banks, the believers of other faiths who were forcibly converted in their final moments. These are the people the world forgot when it created the Mother Teresa myth. These are the people whose stories matter more than any carefully constructed legend. Dr. Arup Chatterjee, a Calcutta-born doctor who has spent decades documenting the truth about Mother Teresa, has collected hundreds of testimonies from people who witnessed the reality behind the myth. Nurses who were forbidden from giving pain medication, doctors who were banned from Mother Teresa's facilities after questioning the treatment protocols, patients' families who watched their loved ones die preventable deaths. These voices tell a different story than the one the world knows. They tell a story of suffering prolonged rather than alleviated, of faith violations rather than spiritual comfort, of money hoarded rather than distributed to those who needed it most. The Mother Teresa case reveals something deeply disturbing about how religious institutions operate. It shows how charitable work can be weaponized for institutional expansion, how human suffering can become a tool for political influence, how the most vulnerable can be exploited by those claiming to serve them. The Vatican knew. They had to know. Medical professionals had been raising alarms for decades. Journalists had published detailed investigations. Former workers had testified about the conditions and practices. Yet, the canonization proceeded. The image was protected. The truth was buried deeper with each passing year. This isn't just about one woman or one organization. This is about a system that prioritizes institutional power over human welfare, that values image over substance, that will sacrifice truth itself to maintain religious authority. What's perhaps most disturbing is how this pattern continues today. Across the world, religious charitable organizations operate with minimal oversight, collecting millions in donations while providing services that often prioritize conversion over actual aid. The Mother Teresa model has become a template. Create a powerful image of saintly service, collect massive donations, use that money for institutional expansion, while providing minimal actual assistance to those claimed to be served. Modern medical professionals working in areas of poverty describe encountering facilities that still operate on the Mother Teresa model, withholding proper medical care in favor of prayer and religious instruction, using medical vulnerability as an opportunity for conversion, prioritizing the salvation of souls over the healing of bodies. The philosophy of sacred suffering still infects charitable work around the world. The belief that the poor must endure pain to achieve spiritual purity still drives funding decisions and treatment protocols in religious medical facilities. But there's an even deeper horror in the Mother Teresa story, one that touches on the fundamental nature of how we understand good and evil in our world. For decades, millions of people have donated money, thinking they were helping the poor. Countless individuals have been inspired by what they believed was an example of pure selflessness and compassion. Entire generations have been taught that Mother Teresa represents the highest ideals of human service. All of this built on a lie. This isn't just about one woman's failings or one organization's corruption. This is about how easily human beings can be manipulated into supporting the very opposite of what they believe they're supporting. It's about how institutions can invert good and evil so completely that suffering becomes sacred and help becomes hindrance. The Mother Teresa myth has achieved something truly sinister. It has made people feel good about supporting systems that perpetuate the very problems they claim to solve. Even today, presenting evidence about Mother Teresa's real activities meets with fierce resistance. People who have invested emotionally in the myth refuse to examine the evidence. Religious authorities deflect and redirect rather than address the documented facts. This resistance reveals something deeply troubling about human psychology. We want our heroes to be pure. We need our saints to be spotless. When confronted with evidence that contradicts our cherished beliefs, we often choose the comfort of illusion over the pain of truth. The Mother Teresa story has become too embedded in our cultural consciousness to be easily dislodged. She has become more symbol than person, more myth than history. And myths, once established, have their own gravity, pulling all evidence toward their narrative orbit. This is how history gets rewritten. This is how truth becomes lost. Not in dramatic moments of censorship or book burning, but in the quiet accumulation of selective memory and willful blindness. The real cost of Mother Teresa's canonization goes far beyond religious politics or institutional credibility. Every day that the myth persists, the lessons of her true legacy go unlearned. How many charitable organizations today still operate under the assumption that suffering is holy? How many still withhold medical care in favor of spiritual intervention? How many still see conversion as more important than healing? The Mother Teresa model of charity, where the giver feels virtuous while the receiver continues to suffer, remains the template for too much modern charitable work. It's charity as ego gratification rather than effective assistance. Every statue erected in her honor, every street named after her, every time her name is invoked as an example of pure goodness, reinforces a dangerous myth about what charity should be. The Mother Teresa story forces us to confront some of the deepest philosophical questions about good and evil, truth and power, suffering and salvation. If someone genuinely believes they are serving God by allowing people to suffer, are their actions evil? If an institution creates more suffering than it alleviates, but calls it holy work, what moral category does it occupy? The Mother Teresa case suggests that intentions matter less than we often believe. The most horrific actions in human history have often been justified by sincere belief. The road to hell is indeed paved with good intentions, or at least with intentions that seem good to those who hold them. This is the true horror. Mother Teresa likely believed she was doing God's work. She probably died thinking she had served humanity. The most dangerous evil isn't the kind that knows it's evil, it's the kind that believes it's good. As more people learn the truth about Mother Teresa, a painful awakening is occurring. The comfortable narratives about charity and sainthood are crumbling. The easy answers about good and evil are proving inadequate. This awakening is necessary, even though it's painful. We must learn to see past the carefully constructed images to the reality beneath. We must develop the courage to question even our most cherished beliefs when evidence contradicts them. The Mother Teresa story teaches us that real charity requires more than good intentions. It requires expertise, accountability, and a willingness to let results matter more than ideology. True compassion doesn't find beauty in suffering. It fights to eliminate suffering. Real saints don't accumulate power and wealth while claiming to serve the poor. They use their resources to actually lift people out of poverty. The dark truth behind Mother Teresa demands a reckoning, not just with her legacy, but with our own capacity for deception, our own willingness to believe comfortable lies rather than face difficult truths. How many other heroes in our pantheon deserve closer scrutiny? How many other charitable organizations prioritize image over impact? How many other religious institutions use suffering as a tool for control? The Mother Teresa story is not unique. It's illustrative. It shows how power structures use the guise of charity to maintain themselves, how religious authority can be weaponized against the very people it claims to serve, how the most vulnerable become tools in larger games of institutional politics. Tonight, we've journeyed into the darkness behind one of history's most carefully maintained myths. We've seen how the woman the world knows as a saint was, in reality, something far more complex and disturbing. The evidence is clear and overwhelming. Mother Teresa's organization prolonged suffering rather than alleviated it. She collected millions for the poor while keeping them in poverty. She violated the religious beliefs of dying people while claiming to serve them. She legitimized dictators and criminals while portraying herself as a champion of the oppressed. But perhaps the most disturbing truth is how successfully this reality has been hidden, how the myth has not just survived, but thrived despite decades of evidence to the contrary. As you leave here tonight, you carry this knowledge with you. You know the truth that billions still don't know. You've seen behind the veil that the powerful have spent so much energy maintaining. What will you do with this knowledge? Will you continue to let the lie comfortable millions? Or will you help unveil the truth, no matter how uncomfortable it makes people? The dead who suffered in Mother Teresa's houses of horror cannot speak for themselves. The poor who never received the aid donated in her name cannot tell their stories. The believers who were converted against their will in their final moments cannot protest. But we can. We can refuse to let their suffering be forgotten. We can demand truth over comfortable fiction. We can insist that charity be measured by results, not by intentions. The real saints aren't the ones on pedestals. They're the ones working quietly, effectively, transparently to actually reduce suffering in the world. They're the doctors who fight for pain management for all patients. They're the aid workers who publish their financial records and success metrics. They're the caregivers who respect the beliefs and dignity of those they serve. Mother Teresa was not a saint. She was not even a good person by any reasonable measure. She was a tool of institutional power who allowed her organization to cause immense suffering while portraying themselves as saviors. The dark truth behind Mother Teresa is really the dark truth behind so many of our myths. That appearance matters more than reality. That power can masquerade as humility. That suffering can be repackaged as sacred. That the most vulnerable can become pawns in games they don't even know they're playing. Remember this truth. Share this truth, because only in the light of truth can we hope to create the kind of world that truly helps the suffering instead of just pretending to do so. The woman in the white sari was not who she seemed. The house of the dying was not a place of mercy. The saint was not a saint. And now that you know, you can never unknow. The comfortable lies have been shattered. The dark truth has been revealed. What remains is what you'll do with that truth. Tonight, you've learned that sometimes the most convincing masks hide the darkest realities, that sometimes the most revered figures perpetrate the most serious crimes against those they claim to serve. Mother Teresa's real legacy isn't one of sainthood. It's a warning about the dangers of unquestioned authority, about the ease with which suffering can be sacralized, about how institutions can invert their stated missions while maintaining their public images. Sweet dreams.